Good morning. I'm Ernest Bower, the Senior Advisor and Director of the Southeast Asia Program here at CSIS. We're very fortunate this morning to have Ambassador Chan Heng Chee from the Embassy of Singapore. Welcome, Ambassador. You've just had a watershed election in Singapore. Could you tell us a little bit about what happened and what are some of the key highlights from the election?
It was a watershed election in Singapore on May 7th. I think Singapore came out the winner as a whole. Singaporeans won, the incumbent party, the PAP, won, and the opposition parties won also. It was a good election, and it was a watershed election because for the first time since independence, the opposition broke through and they won 6 seats in Parliament. It all went to one party, Workers' Party, one slate of GRC, the group representation constituency, which carried 5 seats, and a single member district, so 6 seats altogether. The People's Action Party's vote dropped from 66.6% in the last election to 60.1% in this election. Now, in any other party, in any country, any other country would be cheered by this result. But for the People's Action Party, which has always taken governance very seriously, they began to take stock of themselves. And I say that the incumbent party, the PAP, came out the winner too because they had a solid majority, but they were quick to grasp the message. And you have the Prime Minister talking of carrying on the transformation of the party. You will get a new PAP. And you have Teo Chee Hean, the Deputy Prime Minister, saying that there will be changes in governance, there will be changes in the way we make policy, and changes in the way we deliver public services.
How did the opposition sort of finally break through? Is it a structural, strategic, good tactics, or was it?
I think,
time in Singapore?
well, you know, in a funny way, it is the success of the PAP government. They have educated the people, it's a good economy, Singapore has reached a level of affluence, and Singaporeans now want more than just bread and butter things. They want democracy, they want freedom, they want the right to express themselves, much more.
Yes.
And now in this, well, the opposition has been gaining some traction in each election. In the last election, in 2006, Aljunied, George, my ex-foreign minister, former foreign minister George Yu's constituency, he was pushed and he won by a narrow margin. So you see at every election the opposition making a little more headway. This time, I think what was surprising about this election was that so many qualified candidates came up for the opposition. Yes. And that's what's new. And it was a good election, Ernie, if I may say this, because I thought it was very civilized. It was concentrated on policies. When George Yeo lost the election, he was gracious in his defeat. And the Workers' Party, on the other hand, also, Lau Tia Kiang came out to say, we won not because the PAP did not do their work. They did their work, but it was a tide. The people wanted, the electorate wanted an opposition. It was really very civilized. And yesterday I saw young Nicosia's blog, video, where she sort of paid respect to Lee Kuan Yew, Lee Kuan Yew, and Goh Chok Tong for the work they've done, the contributions to the country. That's healthy, and that, yes, now they want to leave, and so it's a new generation.
Well, I want to talk about personalities in a minute, but first I think there are a lot of Washington and a lot of our viewers would have a question. Will this somehow change Singapore's policy, foreign policy, national security policy? Is Singapore going to change to external partners because of this election?
First of all, this election, interestingly, is like any other election in any country, about domestic issues. Right. It was about rising cost of living, which was about the immigration policy. Too many foreigners coming in, housing, competing for jobs, squeeze of the middle class, yawning gap between the rich and the poor, and it's housing prices. Foreign policy was not an issue. There have been complaints about too many foreigners, but I think every Singaporean knows that for Singapore to survive, we have to remain open to the world. We're a city-state, nation-state without natural resources. We trade to survive. We need foreign investments. So I think that openness will still be there. I don't see policy changing. But the government now will have to integrate the influx of immigrants and foreign people working, and provide more facilities, less squeeze on the transport system, housing prices. Foreign policy, I think we are committed to the same foreign policy. Prime Minister is there, pretty much the same team with some new additions.
Could we talk about that team a little bit? We all saw the headline that Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew has decided to leave government. I think Goh Chok Tong will also leave but retain a title. Could you talk about some of the changes and faces that we might see, and what are the implications of these changes?
Minister Mentor Lee Kuan Yew, who has given up his title, is now 87. I think people expected at some stage he would step down. It was a question of when, I think during the campaign he said, for the next 2 years I might be around, but maybe, next election, but he saw the election results, and I think after that made the decision that it's the young people, it's the young electorate. You've got to understand the young. Sure. And he did what he thought was in the national interest by stepping aside. He did that in 1990, November, when he stepped aside as a prime minister voluntarily. He's done this. But Lee Kuan Yew does not need the title of Minister Mentor. People don't come to Singapore to meet him or invite him overseas because he's a Minister Mentor. He's invited, he's seen. They seek him out because he is Lee Kuan Yew. So, he will still be Lee Kuan Yew. Don't forget that Deng Xiaoping, he gave up all his titles. He was vice premier, and then when he gave up his last title as head of CMC, the Military Commission, he was chairman of the China Bridge Club. And yet world leaders went to see him. There was no mistake, that they knew he, he had leadership.
Very good point.
I think Lee Kuan Yew will be sought after for his strategic thinking, for his view of the world, his analysis of the world. The leadership torch is now has been passed on really, to Prime Minister Lee Kuan Yew, to Lee Hsien Loong. It was passed on first to Goh Chok Tong. Right. Now Goh Chok Tong remains as advisor. Okay. Lee Kuan Yew too.
Senior Minister Emeritus?
Emeritus. He's not a member of cabinet. Okay. And both have relinquished their formal GIC positions, GIC and MAS position, but remain advisors.
Okay. Can you talk about some of the new line ministers? You have a new foreign minister, a new defense minister. Both these positions are very important to the U.S.-Singapore relationship.
Sure. My foreign minister, the new foreign minister, is Mr. Shanmugam, and he is in fact a very articulate person. He was one of the top lawyers in the private sector. Yes. He was a backbencher for years. I think he couldn't be enticed into the cabinet. Then he entered the cabinet, became Minister of Home Affairs, Minister of Law. Now he's the Minister of Foreign Affairs. I am sure, he will do well. Yes. You have to understand that in any government, and certainly in the governments that follow the Westminster type of model, the bureaucracy really does help foreign ministers, and there's a continuity there. And so I think he will do very well, and I see no reason to think he will make any turn in any way. This is the Singapore foreign policy.
Yes.
Now, the defense, defense minister Ng Hen was the education minister last. I believe you interviewed him here.
I did. He was in that chair
Right.
a couple months ago.
Yes. Now, Ng Hen was second minister of defense, so it does not come new to him.
Right.
So I imagine there would be continuity there too, and I don't see the policy changing.
And Admiral Chiu,
He's the deputy prime minister, and he becomes the minister of home affairs.
any other key ministerial changes that you think we should highlight here today?
Well, the trade minister remains the same.
Exactly.
He's been, leading in the TPP discussions. We did a very good APEC meeting under Minister Lim Heng Kiang, and he's been a very good trade minister. There's a new education minister, Heng Chee, who is really one of the best of the generation. I've worked with Chee and Minister Heng. And he's visited here in Washington, and he has an ability to move in different areas, whether it's for foreign policy, domestic policy, or the monetary issues, monetary policy. He was, as you know, the head of MAS.
Yes. What happens now in terms of governance in Singapore? Is the cabinet up and working right away? Will we see them in the United States soon?
I hope
what should
so.
we expect?
I hope so. It's interesting. Singapore has always been praised for good governance.
Yes.
And we are indeed well governed when you compare Singapore with the rest of the world. But you can never sit on your laurels, and the electorate expects more. And Singaporeans, because we are used to high standards of governance, now want more. And the government, the PAP government, has agreed now to look at new ways of bringing in people more to the decisions. I think they've been charged during the campaign by the opposition, airing, I guess, almost 40% of the electorate's views that there has been too much of a top-down policy, top-down way of doing policy. And they promised to listen more, bottom-up. We've had feedback channels, and it's a question of what we do with it. And I would say, Ernie, as a bureaucrat myself, that it's not just politicians. Bureaucrats too have to change somewhat. We have very good bureaucrats, and I'm constantly told by Americans and other countries that they are surprised at what a deep bench of talent there is in Singapore.
Absolutely.
And I see that talent now also going to the opposition as well.
Probably a healthy thing. Let me ask you to put your regional analyst hat on, because I know you think a lot about regional politics and foreign affairs. Do you think if we look at Southeast Asia, you sort of see the changing of the guard? The democratic urges are pushing out, and Singapore seems to have managed it extremely well. Do you think your election will have an impact on the neighbors, and what sort of trends do you see regionally?
I am sure, every government in the region is looking at the results. I believe that everyone will be looking at the impact of social media.
Yes.
But, we're trying to understand how much impact social media had on this election. I read an analysis, it was in the papers, which said that it didn't have that much impact because, it's how many people access, what percentage of your electorate access social media?
Yes.
Is it 10%? Is it 7%? Is it 20%? I don't think we have the clear figure. Some people think it made a difference in one of the GRCs, the Marine Parade GRC, because it was a direct appeal. There were two young candidates, one in each party, PAP and the opposition, and that played virally in the internet. But I see social media as a megaphone. It helps to galvanize some sections, and it may sometimes be enough to tip over to win constituencies. But really, Singapore has managed this transition very well. We've opened up, We've opened up all along, slowly. I've always said, Ernie, to Americans that Our system works. It is democratic. All you need is good candidates in the opposition, and if they come up with proper policies, then you will find that the system works. I know we've been charged with being authoritarian and all that, but I was convinced that the system works, and now you see it working.
Yeah, I would say that's a great note to end our interview on. The system in Singapore does seem to work, and the transition has been, as you say, orderly, and I think it actually will have a lot of impact regionally, and I think hopefully a very positive way.
And you see, with the transformation that the PAP is doing, new PAP, new Democrat, new whatever, parties do change and they, get a new lease of life.
Well, thank you, Ambassador Chan. In fact, this interview will be seen on social media, on CSIS Facebook, and you can get a link to it on Twitter. But thank you, Ambassador Chan, for joining us today. Good luck with the new cabinet, and we hope to see a lot of them here at CSIS as soon as they're ready to come.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Yes.